Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're going to do something a little different. We are putting science itself on trial. Why? To really get our heads around one of its most critical ideas, the null hypothesis. You can think of it as the engine of skepticism that pushes all discovery forward. I mean, think about it. How does anyone, not just scientists, but us, tell if something is a real, genuine effect or just random chance, right? Is that new diet pill actually doing anything, or is it just a fluke? Is that new way of teaching really working, or are the students' test scores just, statistical noise? Okay, probably the best way to wrap your head around this whole thing is to imagine the scientific process as a courtroom trial. Seriously, every single new idea, every wild claim, it has to stand up in court, in front of a judge and a jury of hard evidence. And in this scientific courtroom, the number one rule is this: you are innocent until proven guilty. The default, the starting point, is always that there's no real effect, that nothing special is actually happening. It's totally up to the evidence to prove otherwise. All right, so let's meet the defendant in our little trial here. Its formal name? The Null Hypothesis. This is the idea that's on trial. This is the claim that any new, shiny theory has to defeat. And this right here, this sets up the big showdown. On one side, you've got the defendant, H0, the null hypothesis. Think of it as the boring, nothing's happening here default. And on the other side, that's the prosecution with its case, H1, the alternative hypothesis. This is the exciting, bold new claim that yes, something is happening. So when you boil it all down, the null hypothesis is just the boring baseline reality. It's what we assume is true until we have some killer evidence that proves it wrong. It's the idea that, say, a new drug works no better than a sugar pill, or that there's absolutely no link between two things you're looking at. So what makes this null hypothesis idea such a big deal, such a powerful tool? Well, for starters, it's our baseline, right? It's the default we always start from. But here's the really critical part. It has to be falsifiable. That's a fancy word that just means there has to be a way to actually test it and, maybe even prove it's wrong. And at the end of the day, it's always about that idea of zero change, zero effect. Okay, so you can't have a trial without evidence, right? And in the world of science, evidence means one thing: data. So how do we actually get the null hypothesis up on the stand and start cross-examining it? Well, there's a pretty clear procedure that scientists follow to weigh all the evidence. Step 1, you assume the defendant, our no-effect hypothesis, is totally innocent. Then you go run your experiment. You gather up all the facts, all the data, and then you got to do some math. What they do is calculate a single number called a test statistic. And all this number does is summarize how surprising the data is. You can almost think of it as a shockometer. How far off are your results from that boring, no-effect world you started with? And that calculation, it leads us to maybe the most famous and honestly, the most misunderstood number in all of statistics, the p-value. I'm sure you've seen it before, that little p less than 0.05. This is the prosecution's star piece of evidence. Okay, lean in, because this is the most important point, and it's where a ton of people trip up. A p-value is not, I repeat, not the probability that your new theory is true. Nope, it's the probability of seeing evidence this strong if the null hypothesis was actually true. So a really tiny p-value just means your results would be a crazy, shocking coincidence if the no-effect defendant were really innocent. So the evidence has been presented, the p-value is on the table. It's time for the judge, the scientist, to deliver a verdict. But hold on, these verdicts are, they're very specific. They're worded really carefully. We never say the null hypothesis is innocent or that the new theory is guilty. Why? Because science is all about probabilities, not 100% certainty. So really, you've only got two possible verdicts. If that p-value is teeny tiny, meaning your results were super surprising, you reject the null hypothesis. Basically, the evidence is so strong, it casts some serious doubt on the whole no-effect story. But if the evidence just isn't strong enough, the verdict is failed to reject the null. And this part right here is absolutely critical. So let's be clear. Failing to reject the null does not mean you've proven it's true. It's just like a jury saying not guilty instead of innocent. It doesn't mean the defendant didn't do it. It just means this particular trial didn't have enough evidence to get a conviction. All right, so
Why are we going through all this courtroom drama? Why does this matter for science? And more importantly, for us? What's the big takeaway here?
Think of the null hypothesis as a guardrail, a safety brake. It's this built-in systematic skepticism that forces us to prove our claims with overwhelming evidence, instead of just, believing what we want to believe or getting fooled by pure random chance. You see, by always starting from that position of no effect, the whole scientific process becomes way more robust, way more reliable. It's our best defense against false alarms. It demands that new ideas come with strong proof, and ultimately, it makes sure that our knowledge is actually earned through hard evidence, not just assumed. And that really leaves us with a final thought, doesn't it? We live in a world that is just flooded with headlines and ads and all these bold claims. So what would happen if we all started with the null hypothesis in our daily lives? What if our default setting was a healthy dose of skepticism that demanded real evidence before we bought in? It's an incredibly powerful tool, and not just for scientists in a lab, but for every single one of us trying to make sense of the world.